Welcome to the Accu-Trade VIN-dow podcast. This week, Bob talks about how a universal condition report can resolve marketplace miscommunication and avoid high auction fees.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's VIN-dow with Robert Hollinshead. And this week, Bob, I know, and it's the industry-wide concerns, topics that's on the tip of everyone's mind, something you see all the time, condition reports.
Many years ago, we created a version called the Universal Condition Report with the full intent. I think it was around 1999 when we started it, right? With the full intent of being agnostic and inclusive, where everybody, the buyer and the seller, really without a third party, because when you get a third party involved, you have people pointing at things that are irrelevant to a conversation. You're asking to define a tree, and they're talking about rocks and bricks and things. And in other words, it's got nothing to do with a tree, but you're bringing it into the conversation as if it has some sort of relevance. You follow me? When it doesn't. That causes frustrated communication, and therefore, that's what's happening right now with the Palestinians and the Israelis, right? It's bad communication. Next thing you know, we're going to have a war. Even there's no reason to have a war. You live in the same place, you drink food, same food, but you're going to have a war because you can't communicate. And that's what happens with condition reports, right? We have certain platforms today that they deny numbers, right? Not going to use a number. And I believe that, and I agree with that. Only if you can show enough information where you don't need the number, which isn't the fact on that particular platform. I think everybody would know what I'm referring to, because you don't use a number, and therefore you can't do what somebody says. If it's not a 3.5, don't bid because the car's junk, right? When that obviously has no relevance to the condition of the car. So the alternative isn't giving you less information, and you can dream up whatever you want it to be, and you make a bid, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose based on you got lucky or no, you didn't, right? A universal condition report, from our perspective from the very first day, was based on one simple thing, right on the window of a car. You tell the world what you're willing to tell them about it. You follow me? It's got double power seats. You follow me? In other words, that's an important option on a Park Avenue, right? It's very important, right? And if you didn't take the time and effort to look, and now it's on the window, you can actually bid on the car because you saw it as it coming through the lane. And all I'm saying to you is, a condition report really starts, and in our product, it starts before you've thought about owning a car, because it's before you traded a car, because it's the same condition report you're using to rationally talk to the consumer with. It's a dent, it's a scratch, it's previous paintwork, it's a bad vehicle history report. It's got X amount of miles, it's got X, Y, Z for equipment. And when you present that to the consumer based on all the facts, it's very difficult for anybody, including the salesperson, to deny what the net result is. You can now base your conversation on fact. Oh, you said navigation was only worth $1,100. I think it's worth $1,200. Okay, good. So we set the let's call it the definition of an item, and we put a value next to it, and now you can argue over the value of that, not whether it is part of, but actually the nth degree of what it is. And now you're actually talking about facts as opposed to fictional, who knows what, where you can't really come to a logical conclusion. So if you're using that process when you're trading a car, and then when you push to a broader market of arbitraged buyers to find the best end user, and guess who uses the exact same thing on the other end? You guessed it, the buyer. So when you plug in an OBD when you're trading the car, it obviously is related directly to the condition report, because it obviously matters if the car is a mechanical wreck or not. And if it's not, it shows everything green. And if it is, it highlights exactly what's wrong with it. That then travels along through the remarketing process. And therefore, a buyer that represents X, and you can't lie about mechanical and electrical because it's science that actually said what's wrong with it, right? Now when the buyer gets it, like a big miracle, he's using the exact same platform. And when something it does not co-validate, it's different in any material way, a dent, a scratch, a cam phaser noise, right? What you wind up with is a platform that the buyer and seller can communicate. Whether the car got there 9 days late because of, transportation issues or whatever the reason happens to be, really doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The ability to frustrate a buyer and a seller has just been eliminated, in my estimation, to a huge degree. You're not waiting on hold, waiting for somebody to call back and say, oh, that was the greatest guy in the world. He said it was 300, and the other guy said 4, and we made a deal. The probability of that happening successfully on a broader base, right, universally, let's say, on anybody's marketplace, I'd say remains a giant chunk of broken glass in your shoe, right? In other words, it's the thing that really causes more angst than I think anybody is capable of dealing with without having an aneurysm, right? Because there's not an alternative until now, I don't think the conversation really gets off the ground, because you can identify problems, and identifying problems is some people's specialty. And then it's the let's call it the modus operandi of other people to create solutions to those problems, not just gang on and jump on the pile. Yeah, there's a problem. This is no good. This sucks. They suck. He sucks. Everybody sucks. Or just say, no, here's something that actually universally resolves the issue. Not just in the middle of the strobe light, and you're now in the remarketing sector. No, it works in a service drive, works in digital retail, it works in a showroom. And then when it's time for a, let's call it a remarketing event, regardless of platform, the buyer and the seller are actually talking to each other. We keep the third party who does title and check out of the conversation, because that only creates frustration. Oh, he's a big guy. You stick up for his, which really isn't true, but it's easy to perceive it that way if it doesn't go your direction. That's an easy defense mechanism to say, I'm a little guy. They eat us. It ain't true. The opposite's true. We go overboard to make sure the little guy doesn't get hammered. I know that sounds ridiculous, because nobody would believe anybody stupid enough to do that, but we do it. Where a big guy is no different than any little guy, because they bought a car, and we're talking about a car with a problem or a set of problems, and all we're doing is trying to resolve them. If everybody's sitting on the same platform, that resolution is in hand. Does that make any sense to you, Sean? In other words, we're never going to have a resolution to condition reports when there's 714 different versions, each one being interpreted differently at all 942 locations, right? It's never going to happen. And therefore, you've basically emasculated the capability of your chosen marketplace. We personally choose Manheim, Pennsylvania. We've been there for many, 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 many decades. It's, a whole lot of reasons for it, right? You're not going to change anything because the other guy uses ACV, the other uses backline, the other one's using OVE, the other one's using OpenLane, others all of them, all different. None of them have what you would call a communicative platform that enables buyers and sellers universally to transact. Somebody gives you a better deal to do it someplace else, so you choose that. Now, what you've done is you've also then, simultaneously chosen the method that they grade the car with, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. You don't have any say in it. You're certainly not involved in it, right? In other words, that's why people pay. This is the other piece of this. When we think about remarketing and platforms, and one charges $300, the other charges $1,100 to sell a car or buy a car, they actually the marketplaces actually have a very strong premise to why they charge X amount of money for a fee, and it's not the title in a check, because I can get any auction anywhere to do a title and a check for $100. It's what the rest of the afterbirth of the that's a mess. The afterbirth, that's where you can start to justify checks bouncing and arbitration, turn it into hairy-carry. You follow me? It's kamikaze stuff, right? Now, if the platform itself was to mitigate that 90% of reasons why cars blow up after the sale, it's not title and check. That's title didn't come in 40 days, you can bring the car back. That's 10% of the blow-ups. The rest of them are based in a bad description or a mechanical issue that's, like somebody tried to, maybe they didn't know it. It's, naivete that they didn't know it, or they absolutely knew it, and that's how that car wound up in the marketplace, right? So if you have a platform that enables knowledge prior to ownership, knowledge during ownership, and then knowledge during the process of finding the next best end user, there's utterly no reason on earth why auction fees would be $900 buyer and seller. No reason on earth. If anybody believes that to be true, fairy tales are true also. It's nonsense. And it's really what holds people back and why cars transact in the parking lot, always have, by the way. There was a point where we actually calculated 10% of all transactions were happening in Manheim Auto Auctions parking lot, in the truck lot. 10%. Guys were actually bringing truckloads of cars in and selling them to another dealer prior to the auction, right? So there's reasons for that. It's not because we're rats by nature. It's rats by, when you create a guillotine maneuver in terms of what you're charging for two people to get together and buy and sell a car, most people try to move their neck before the blade comes down, right? And that's what happened there. It's kind of similar to what happens with condition reports today. You put people in a position where they're outside of the realm of, even though they're ones with the skin in the game, they got the money, they bought it. Now the other guy's got the money, he's going to sell it, right? And somebody's going to be the next best end user. They both got together and they agreed to a price. The problem is now afterwards is it's got a thing and it don't have a thing, and the other thing was missing, and the other thing is something else. My perspective is, let's write on the window of the car. Yes, I did kiss someone's ass to buy this car. Yes, we did drag it here on Sunday. Yes, it went in to have X, Y, and Z done at Gibbels Auto Upholstery to fix it. And now here it is on Friday, looking better than it'll ever look again the rest of its life. And it's written on the side of the window, local Lexus trade. No paintwork, never smoked in, brand new. You follow me? Now the next guy says, going back to Brooklyn or Washington, D.C., man, I bought an unbelievable car. I have no idea why that car got wholesaled. Man, oh, look at this car. I paid too much, but guess what happens next? It's the first car I sold on Saturday morning. That story is repetitive ad nauseum through decades. It all comes back to, I'd say, the disaster that we deal with today in this pandemic in an unbelievably phenomenal marketplace of how people use, how they don't use, how they abuse, how they overuse, how they don't understand condition reports. I say one platform for all marketplaces. Make it the railroads. See, don't forget, railroads did this. They did it. You got the B&O, you got the other one, and the other one, right? They got their own rail. Next thing you know, they can only get one place because they only got this much track. So they have to use the common track. They got to use common track because if they don't, they can't go anywhere. They got a different load, and now they got a different market. You got to build new track. No, you use the track that everybody's using, right? If everybody got to pay for the maintenance and so forth, that's fine. But a universal track actually created the industrial boom in the United States, right? Because everybody's on the same track. Even though you're selling different goods, you might even be competitive on the same track, might even be in the same train, right? But what you wind up with is the capability of actually moving everything forward. And that's, when we're looking at the banter that goes on, and not just on social media, but between dealers and, you can't believe this happened, the other guy said this, and the other thing's that, it all boils down to, and then one dealer's going to listen to this and say, oh, you can't trust a dealer. No, you can't. You really can't, unless you can. Because what happens is when you use a platform that's universal, you're being vetted on the opposite side of it. You can't deny that it's got X, Y, or Z, or it doesn't have X, Y, or Z when you're using the same platform. See, auctions and actually all marketplaces have always kept the buyer and the seller completely separate. It wasn't always like that. It used to be you go to arbitration, and when you get to arbitration, you're face to face with the buyer, or you're going to be gentlemen and find a solution. You follow me? And that's really how it works. So you really didn't go home with cars 3 days after you sold them and found out they got post-sale inspected, and it's because somebody said something was wrong with it that you didn't know was wrong with it. But if you could have talked to them, you could easily kept the deal together. That never happens today. We've categorically eliminated that from occurring because you got an entity in the middle, regardless of what the entity is. Somebody in the middle with no skin in the game, with no desire, actually, because there's no motivation. They're not getting paid extra because they held a deal together, right? They don't care. Their theory is you're just going to list it again and sell it again anyway. So the buyer and the seller are frustrated. Bidder fatigue, more bidder fatigue. I say the platform, basically, in an agnostic and inclusive way, agnostic, doesn't matter who you come from, where you go to church or you don't go to church, synagogue, mosque, whatever, don't matter. You're on the same platform, you follow me? Agnostic and inclusive, no matter what marketplace you are. Use a universal condition report that is NAAA approved, even though you're not NAAA approved. Let it be that way, because now we have a common language. It's called English of the medical journal world. There's a reason why it's in English, because everybody around the world can read the medical journal, no matter where they're from. We can't read German, we can't read Chinese, but Chinese people can read English, and so can Germans. They all speak English. Therefore, there's a common language. It's called English in medical journals, isn't it? Why would we continue to have, in the automotive industry and remarketing in particular, 700 different languages and nobody can talk to one another? It's physically impossible. You can scream louder, but that don't mean you can hear anybody. And therefore, the dopes, the car dealers, morons, us, the buyer and the seller, sit in the middle of this frustration of the inability to communicate, because we're using 73 completely separate platforms that have no relationship to what we do for a living. It's weird. And the frustration is real. And it's always been here, right? The only difference is, I believe, we have a solution. Nobody's ever going to listen to it, because it would make someone else's solution and their little tiny PVC pipe for their little tiny, tiny little sliver of the world, tiny, minuscule little sliver, but they're important to themselves, but not to the buyer and the seller, the dealer. Because don't forget one thing, all marketplaces only have one customer. They don't have 73 different varieties of customers. You know they got us, car dealers, period. End of the story, nothing to talk about. You can talk all kinds of other farts no matter what you want to do. The one fact is all marketplaces only got us. And we're subject to the policies and I would call it the chauffeur knowledge, the chauffeur knowledge of the industry that we're in, right? Never really did it themselves, made up the policies and the platforms that really aren't made by car dealers for car dealers. No matter who it is, no matter what platform it is, it's not made by us for us. It's made by them to superimpose it on us in a way that's acceptable to them, but totally unacceptable if a dealer actually analyzes and thinks about it. For us, it's no good. That's why I say a universal thing could change the way all of them function, and therefore makes it easier for the only people with skin in the game, us, car dealers, people that are making the effort to buy and sell cars for a living, and keep them in business, because without us, they don't exist. How's that, Shawnee? Little soapbox opera type thing here in the morning. Got me wound up, didn't you?
I love it. The Universal Condition Report. Needed to be said. Thank you very much, Bob.
Ciao.
Thanks for listening. Tune in every week for a new episode where we chat with Bob Hollinshead, founder of Accu-Trade and the largest independent vehicle wholesaler in North America.